Hello, and welcome back. This video is about static mesh animation, as well as some blueprint reparenting. And a special thanks to all my supporters. Thank you for helping me help others. So the way we have the enemy actor class set up is that we created a static mesh component, and we're setting it as the root component. But what if we want to revert that design and no longer want the static mesh component to be the root? We can do that by adding a scene component. So I'll just copy this or duplicate that. This will be a scene component. There we go. We'll call this scene root comp. And then here, similarly, I'm going to duplicate this. We'll have our scene root comp here. And this is a U scene root comp or scene component. And we'll call this scene root comp. So the root component gets set to that. And then our static mesh comp, we're then calling setup attachment on the root component. This could also just be the scene root comp here. That's the same at that point. So with that done, I will compile and see you in the editor. And when we open the enemy base blueprint, you can see that the hierarchy has changed up here. We now have our scene root comp and our static mesh comp. So while this worked in this scenario, running it the way that I did, this is not always going to work. What I was prepared to show you was that it was not going to add the new scene root comp. So this would have stayed with the static mesh comp as the root and the basis component as usual. And then we would have to do some things to make that work. So the reason you may see this differently, and you may still have the static mesh comp as your root component, is that engine objects like this actor are not constructed when they're opened. They're constructed when they're first made or remade. So effectively, two options exist which we can follow, which we don't have to here, but the first is that we could create a new enemy-based blueprint and then set up all the blueprint logic again and then child the green and purple blueprints off it, make sure the wave manager and others are pointing to it, or we can reparent this enemy-based blueprint. If you reparent an actor by going to our class settings here, choosing parent class and changing this, like let's say to actor, it's going to pop up a window that says reparenting this may cause data loss, and it's giving you an option to, not do it. If you don't have the scene root comp here, that is one option. You can go to the parent class, set it to actor. You'll lose some stuff, like for example, actor does not have an on health changed event, so this would get renamed. You'd have to remake it and just reattach it, though that would be after setting the parent class back to the enemy actor. At that point, it would rerun the constructor and then it would update here properly. So while in this case it did rerun the constructor and we got the results there, I'm still going to go through the process I was intending, which was to fix that issue and one other. You may have noticed early on that all the classes that were created started with TD for tower defense, except for the enemy actor. So I'm going to take this opportunity to recreate that class and name it properly. So with that, we want to go into our tools, new C++ class. This is an actor type. Make sure public is selected so it goes in the same place we have it from before. And this time I'm going to call it TD, enemy actor. So we create that. We wait for it to finish compiling. When this live coding window is done and it says this, we can then close the editor, wait for the red bar to go away, and then reload all. So now we have our enemy actor and TD enemy actor. So I'm going to open up enemy actor here. I'm just going to copy everything, paste it into TD enemy actor. Then going to replace enemy actor, TD enemy actor. Copy that. Similarly for the CPP file, just select all, copy, select all and paste. Rename this as well to TD enemy actor everywhere. And I'll see you back in the editor again. So with that done then, now in our class settings, we can go and change the parent class from enemy actor to TD enemy actor. You'll still get this pop-up because it's not converting from a class that's in the, well, later in the hierarchy. You'll see the message here. It says our on health change has an invalid function signature, but it's now been fixed. The new class also has the same one, so that should just work fine. And if you did miss, or if you were missing scene root comp previously, it should show up for you now. I'm just going to run so that we can see things are still working the way they were. We have the health changes still working, showing that, so all good. So 3D animations are built on using bones and rigs and all that stuff, and skeletal mesh is how Unreal makes that work. When we want to animate a static mesh, we do have an option to do it. It's more like using the sequence system for UI animations and whatnot, and we'll add that here. So to add that, we're adding a actor sequence component. I'm going to call this spin sequence. So with that, the first thing you may see is over here there's a warning. It says uses experimental class actor sequence component. Now, experimental means that it's supposed to be in active development by Epic, which implies there may be some issues. So we are taking a chance by using this, but it was also added years ago, so it may never leave this experimental state anyways. It may never get updated. It would be better if we could use skeletal meshes and, proper animations, but the Kenny's Tower Defense Kit that we're using is all static meshes, so we're going to use this for now. So once you have an actor sequence component added, you can look at some settings over here. This spin sequence we want to autoplay, and we want it just always be running. So then we do that, and in our sequence setting here, you can open in tab. It'll pop open the sequencer down here, and you'll be looking at this one specifically. For our spin, we want to add the static mesh. And then from the static mesh, we can go all the way to the bottom, add a relative rotation. We're only worried about the y-axis, so down here, there's an add a key. So we add the key here. We're going to advance half a second, rotate 90 degrees, and add the key again, and do that a few more times. So that will run for 2 seconds, do a full spin, and then this red line over here, we want to drag over. The problem is when you do animations, keyframe animations, we're going from 0 to 360, which is also 0, so we're doing a full spin. And then the last frame is the same as the first frame, so there's going to be a little jitter where it stays on that frame for a little bit too long. So what we want to actually do is have our red bar be a little before the end. This will not be perfect. You will still see some of the jitter, and if you were using an actual animation program or skeletal animations, you could set it up a little better. For now, we're just gonna, deal with it. So with that running, when we hit play, we can now see that our enemies, they're spinning. Now, I'm also going to create a second actor sequence. So if you wanted another animation, you would just add another sequence. We'll call this one death sequence. And you can see down here, nothing has changed. If we click on the button open tab, then it'll switch to that one. For this case, we don't need it to autoplay, and it's only going to run once, so we do not need it to loop. This one is going to also add this static mesh. We're going to do a search in here for scale. We want the relative scale 3D, and we can keyframe the entire scale. It's going to start at 1, and then half a second later, we're just going to set it to 0. Keyframe that again, and of course, make our animation only last half a second. In this case, I'm not worried about that because this is when it's disappearing. With that set, we just need to change our logic up here a little bit. We're going to add a new variable called isDead. This is so that the onDied is only called once. So all we're doing here is we're checking the state of isDead. Oops. In the case where it's already isDead, we don't do anything. When it's false, we only want this to run once, so we'll set isDead, and then we'll move our onDied over here. And then here, if we want to take our spin sequence, we can then call stop. That will stop that animation. And at that point, we also want to start the death sequence. So obviously the opposite of start, or the opposite of stop is start, so we call play sequence. And lastly, we do not want to destroy the actor immediately, so we're just going to do a set timer by event. This will be half a second. And then we're going to add a custom event. Let's call this dead event. And that's just going to call the destroy. Let's throw that up here. All right, so with that running, we'll add a bunch of towers to make sure these things get destroyed. They get down to 0. You can see it stops moving, and it shrinks. You could see the green ones, however, they pop to the full size, the 1.0 scale, and then they go back down. So if we go into our green enemy, the value that's actually being changed is our static mesh comp. The scale is going from 1 to 0. We had it set to half, so then it's spiking up to 1 and then going back down. We can reset this to 1 and instead have our scene root at 0.5. And then we run that with a bunch of towers. The purple one stops and shrinks as normal, and then the green one stops there and shrinks. And lastly, so we still have our enemies down low, so the bullets are just going from there all the way down. So there's a few ways we can fix this. And as with most coding problems, there are many ways to solve them. And the correct way usually depends on your individual design and project. So one way we can resolve this, or one way that it can be resolved that we're not going to do, is that in our enemy base, we could set our static mesh here to 110. You can see now when it comes out, it's up higher like that. The problem is it's still shooting. The projectiles are still going to the origin of the enemy itself, which is at 0 as well. So I'm very confused here. I just set this to 110. Went back into the blueprint, it's now at 0. However, they are actually at 110. So somehow It's set it in the child. Okay, we've reset that. Another way you could fix it is that you could just use an offset value that's set to 110 in this case, and then the projectiles would go towards the position plus the offset. So that's another option that we're not going to go with. The last option is we have our path that we created, and for convenience, we created it along the path that we drew on the actual models, but there's no reason it needs to stay, where it is. Since the positions of the enemies are based on the path, we can also just take the path, put that up at 110, and that will have the same effect. And you can see that the projectiles are going towards the model's origin. I mean, it's still the bottom of the model. We could make it, work a little differently, but that's fine. You can fix that on your own if you have an issue with that. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video and would like to see more, you know what to do. And if you would like to support this channel, watch these videos 2 weeks early, or just want to download the project files, you can do so through my Patreon linked below.